Welcome back to the channel. In the world of true crime, there are killers who leave blood on their hands and guilt in their eyes. But there are also monsters who manage to hide for over 20 years, walking among us as if their conscience never existed. Today, we're diving into one of New York's most chilling murder cases, where the bodies of 3 women were found strangled, bound, and lying lifeless on cold ground. And the killer? He left behind no evidence, except for the one thing he never expected: DNA. Francisco Acevedo, a father, a quiet man with a history of drunk driving arrests, seemed unremarkable. But behind that ordinary exterior hid a nightmare in human form. For nearly 3 decades, his bloody secrets were buried beneath the dust of time, until one seemingly harmless act would bring his entire world crashing down. Have you ever imagined that a single DNA sample, given voluntarily, could resurrect a past soaked in blood and deliver a sentence written by fate itself? And would you believe that sometimes, justice doesn't need a gunshot, just patience? Sit back as we unravel this shocking case. One that's not just about brutal killings, but a terrifying reminder that sometimes, the most dangerous people, are the ones standing quietly right behind you. Part 1, The Dark Beginning, Francisco Acevedo and the Childhood of a Future Killer. Behind every serial killer, there's usually a broken past. But for Francisco Acevedo, his past wasn't just broken, it was a twisted maze of violence, addiction, and hopelessness. Born in 1968 in Meriden, Connecticut, Francisco didn't grow up surrounded by love. He grew up in a home where alcohol, drugs, and fists did the talking. While other children were learning how to spell their names, young Francisco was learning how to hide from beatings and seek comfort in booze. He started drinking at 12. Every time he got hit, he went back to the bottle. "I tried, but I was helpless," a relative testified in court. By 9th grade, Francisco dropped out of school. The classroom couldn't hold him, and society didn't care enough to try. From there, he spiraled into a world of kidnappings, assaults, and domestic violence. His name began appearing more and more in police records, and each charge was darker than the last. 1986, the first crime, a warning ignored. At just 18 years old, Francisco Acevedo committed a horrifying act. He kidnapped and raped a young woman in Connecticut. He was convicted, but only served 2 years before walking free in mid-1988. Yes, you heard that right. A convicted rapist, armed and dangerous, spent just 24 months behind bars. And when he walked out, he wasn't a changed man. He was a predator sharpened by time. What haunts me the most is how calm he was. When I screamed, he just said, "You can scream all you want. No one's going to hear you." The unnamed victim later recalled. The 1990s, a double life begins. On the surface, Francisco tried to appear like any other man, a father, a quiet worker, someone minding his own business. But beneath that facade, he was a heavy alcoholic with a long history of abusing women and children. He once punched a girlfriend in the face until her nose bled. Another time, he strangled the mother of his son when she tried to leave him. He was charged with choking and biting his ex's face, yet still avoided serious jail time. Again and again, the justice system gave him chances that would eventually cost others their lives. He always acted sorry, but as soon as the alcohol kicked in, the violence came back. "I knew one day someone would end up dead," Acevedo's former partner told reporters. A father. A killer. Two faces, one sinister mind. Yes, Francisco had a son. And at times, he acted like he cared. But if there was love, it was never enough to stop what he was doing in the shadows. On quiet nights, when his home was asleep, Francisco would roam the streets of Yonkers. There, women working the streets became easy targets, accessible, vulnerable, and often forgotten. And the chilling question remains, was this part of a long-crafted plan, or the spontaneous explosion of a twisted mind? We may never know for sure. But what we do know is this: 3 women never came home again, and Francisco, then just another face in the crowd, was quietly sowing terror no one suspected. Part 2, 3 Identical Deaths, the chilling murder process of Francisco Acevedo. When people think of serial killers, they often imagine a crazed lunatic, slashing violently like something out of a horror movie. But Francisco Acevedo didn't kill in chaos. He killed with calculated precision and eerie silence. His acts weren't outbursts, they felt more like rituals, coldly repeated with disturbing consistency. First victim, Maria Ramos, 1989. That night, Acevedo drove slowly through the south side of Yonkers, a dim, desolate part of the city filled with warehouses, train tracks, and isolated alleyways where sex workers often waited for clients. He spotted Maria Ramos, standing alone in the cold, wearing a thin coat and looking exhausted. He pulled up next to her and reportedly said, "Just a few minutes. Nobody'll bother us. I've got money." We don't know the exact conversation, but investigators believe she agreed and got into the car. But instead of heading to a motel or safe location, Acevedo drove to an isolated spot near the train tracks, a place without cameras or lights, perfectly concealed in the darkness. There, through either manipulation or sudden violence, he tied her hands and feet. Evidence suggests Maria didn't have a chance to resist, or was too frightened to try. Then, he strangled her with his bare hands, squeezing so hard that her neck cartilage fractured. Maria's body was left lying naked, on her back, bound, exposed to the cold dirt. No signs of robbery. No proof of sexual assault. Acevedo simply finished his ritual and drove off, leaving her like discarded trash. Second victim, Tawanda Hodges, 1991. 2 years later, he repeated the exact same pattern. Tawanda Hodges, 28, had left home that evening and never returned. Like Maria, she came from a difficult background and was known to work nights in the Yonkers Industrial District. Acevedo likely approached her with calm, deceptive words, again pretending to be a paying client. No threats, no weapons, just psychological control. Once she was in his car, he drove her to almost the same remote location where Maria had died, less than a kilometer away. Whether he tortured her or not is unknown. But the result was identical. Tawanda was found strangled, tied up, naked, and lying on her back. The similarity in the crime scene sent chills through detectives. But with no DNA, no witnesses, and no surveillance footage, the case once again went cold. Third victim, Kimberly Moore, 1996. This time, 5 years passed. But Acevedo returned to his pattern. Kimberly Moore, 30, was discovered one morning in May 1996, also in Yonkers. Her body was found in the exact same position, bound, stripped, lying face up, strangled to death. The only difference? This time, investigators found a trace amount of semen, the key piece of evidence that would one day destroy his carefully built wall of silence. Kimberly, like the others, had a history of drug use and sex work. Sadly, this meant her case, just like Maria's and Tawanda's, didn't receive serious attention, buried under society's judgment. Calculated cruelty, not impulsive rage, but deliberate control. Acevedo didn't kill impulsively. He chose victims from the most vulnerable corners of society, women without stable housing, disconnected from family, and frequently ignored by the media. This allowed him to hide in plain sight, even as the crime scene screamed of a serial predator. He bound them, not just to restrain, but to assert dominance. He stripped them, not necessarily for sex, but to degrade and humiliate. He strangled them with his bare hands, to feel, perhaps, the power of life leaving a human body. This wasn't random murder. This was ritual. He repeated the same symbolic process each time. A criminal psychologist later commented, "Why did he stop?" After Kimberly's death, there were no more known victims. But why? Was he afraid? Was he finally satisfied? Or, did he never actually stop, and we just never found the other bodies? The terrifying truth is, for 2 decades after Kimberly's murder, Francisco Acevedo lived a completely normal life, working, raising a son, drinking beer with friends, as if nothing had happened. But eventually, it wasn't a detective or an informant that brought his past back to light. It was Acevedo himself, through a seemingly innocent act. Part 3, 2 Decades of Silence, DNA Breaks the Quiet. For over 20 years since Kimberly Moore's murder, the name Francisco Acevedo didn't appear in any investigation reports. No suspicion. No attention. Because he was too ordinary. A Latin American man living in the Bronx, with a wife and 3 kids. He worked as a taxi driver, did odd jobs, and drank beer with friends in a poor neighborhood just like many others. He even went to jail a few times for drunk driving, but no one ever uncovered the horrific truth behind his calm eyes. In 2009, after being arrested again for drunk driving, Francisco Acevedo was required to submit a DNA sample as part of New York's offender registry. He didn't resist. He thought, what's there to fear? He was just a drunk driver, never caught for any serious crime. A simple prick of a needle, saliva collected, and the file put away in a cabinet. And then, that small action triggered an earthquake. When Acevedo's DNA entered the CODIS database, the National DNA Index, it immediately matched the semen sample collected from Kimberly Moore's 1996 murder case. The police couldn't believe their eyes. But it didn't stop there. When examining other unsolved cold case evidence, his DNA also matched biological traces found on the bodies of Maria Ramos, 1989, and Tawanda Hodges, 1991. 3 cases, 1 killer, exposed by a single voluntary saliva sample. For 2 decades, Francisco lived a life almost without waves. No one suspected him. He was divorced, unemployed at times, a heavy drinker, but never involved in serious criminal cases. He hid perfectly among other societal failures, like a harmless shadow. Perhaps the scariest part is that a man who killed 3 women, strangling them to death with his own hands, tying them up like lifeless dolls in the cold darkness, could also be a father dropping his kids off at school, a quiet neighbor nodding hello in the morning. I sat next to him for years at the bar. He talked only about baseball. No one suspected a thing. A neighbor recalled with disbelief. While Acevedo thought he was safe, science was quietly watching. The advancement of forensic technology, especially DNA storage and cross-checking capabilities, was something he never expected. No confessions. No witnesses. Just one DNA sample, enough to expose a demon disguised as a man. When he was arrested in 2010, Acevedo tried to stay calm. But to the police, that cold indifference only made his crimes feel even more chilling. Because for 20 years, justice didn't fail to arrive, but the victims were too easily forgotten, and the killer was too skilled at hiding. Part 4, The Trial and the Truth That Cannot Be Hidden. When Francisco Acevedo was arrested in 2010, both the public and police were stunned. After more than 2 decades living under a normal facade, a serial killer was finally brought to light. The Westchester County Courthouse became the battleground where Acevedo's horrifying secrets were gradually exposed. Prosecutors painted a dark picture, portraying him not only as a cold-blooded murderer but as a monster living within the community. The defendant exploited the vulnerability of his victims, women without protection, and committed the most ruthless acts we have ever seen. Prosecutor emphasized in court. On the defense side, lawyers argued that Francisco had changed, that he had a family life, and that his past mistakes should be met with mercy. But these pleas were quickly crushed by overwhelming evidence. DNA samples taken from the 3 crime scenes were the core of the case. When forensic experts presented their findings, no one could deny that all traces matched Acevedo's DNA. It was not just evidence, it was the bloodline leading to the brutal truth. During the trial, Acevedo remained mostly silent or denied responsibility. However, testimonies from relatives, survivors of his prior assaults, and historical evidence painted the portrait of a man utterly devoid of sympathy. He was a man full of contradictions, both a father and a monster. But inside, he never changed. A relative revealed. After weeks of debate and presentation of evidence, the court sentenced Francisco Acevedo to life imprisonment without parole for 3 counts of first-degree murder. The verdict was not only punishment for a cold-blooded criminal but also a warning to society: no matter how long a killer hides, justice will come. The Francisco Acevedo case painfully reminds us that society does not always protect its most vulnerable. It also proves the power of science and law in uncovering the truth, no matter how much time passes. Conclusion: a big question about justice and humanity. The Francisco Acevedo case is a heartbreaking story of cruelty and the injustice of society. 3 women were brutally murdered, yet it took more than 2 decades for justice to be served. But is it only the perpetrator who must bear responsibility? Or are there systems and people who overlooked these tragedies and allowed them to happen? The big question for us is society truly protecting its most vulnerable? And if not, what must we do to change that? Thank you all for watching until the very end. If you found this story meaningful, please like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss our upcoming compelling content. See you next time with more stories. Take care and stay safe.